Sometimes a piece of gear does more than just take over an esport. Sometimes it becomes synonymous with an esport. Back in the earliest days of Counter-Strike, for instance, Zowie's highly influential Heaton-designed ergonomic EC mouse was a staple amongst professionals. So much so that to this day, Zowie remains the gold standard among CS enthusiasts for world-class mouse design. Because once a peripheral embeds itself into an esport, it grows along with it. Until eventually, it just becomes a part of the culture of that esport.
Scuff has been with me, and I've been with Scuff basically since the beginning.
And with things like inputs, mice, keyboards, gamepads, fight sticks, that is both reasonable and, well, understandable. But what if I told you that once upon a time, there was an esport whose entire competitive identity was uprooted by a headset?
Yes, Dimitri, a headset. Halo's headset. The Astro A40s. From a base grade prototype that was lugged around in a briefcase to an industry-altering retail release, the Astro A40s turned competitive Halo on its head.
We had this one moment where Triple X had like an old school boombox next to us and blasted noise in there to see if like we could hear anything as we were playing 2v2s, and we couldn't hear anything. And we were like, this is like such an advantage.
Not only did it turn a chaotic, disorganized roster into champions and get banned shortly after, it changed console gaming forever.
Okay, so first of all, I was talking, all right? Second of all, if you're like me, and up until like 2 weeks ago, you never even heard the words Astro, A40, or anything in between, boy, do I have a story for you. Am I allowed to tell it, or are you gonna cut me off again?
I might.
Bro, stop.
Nah, this is fun.
I'm hosting this video.
Yeah, but I'm the one who actually talks to the editors who edit all of your footage, so I don't know. Sam, let's just cut out Dimitri here for a little while. See?
You can't just... Oh my god, I hate him. Okay, in order to understand why the A40 was going to be a game changer, we first need to understand what game it was going to change. Way back in the dark, primordial days of early to mid 2000s console gaming, when online play was first becoming a thing, sound was split between your TV and your headset. And by that I mean your game audio would come through your television speakers, which are usually across the room from you, and your teammates' staticky, usually bong rip infused comms would come through this tiny little dainty over-ear headset that you'd have to wear.
Dude, they can hear me, and I can hear them.
That's the coolest thing about Xbox Live.
Yes, I lived through this era. And yes, it was unironically the best thing ever, and I would give anything to go back.
Right. What the hell kind of name is Soap, eh? How'd a muppet like you pass selection?
He was special.
Anyway, because of this, communication was not so much a priority. People definitely used headsets on Xbox Live, just, you know, for stuff like this.
Shoot a gun, dog. Learn how to shoot a gun.
Riot Shield. What else do you want me to...
Riot Shield. I'm a pussy that use Riot Shield.
Now, obviously in competitive play, people were starting to understand the significance of sound, both in terms of what your teammates had to say and of the game itself. The issue is that because they were sort of naturally decoupled, it was hard to capitalize on one without discounting some aspect of the other. The best examples of this were in Halo, since for a pretty long time, it was basically the only serious team console esport. And who better to historicize that era than Scott Gandhi Lucier, one of the most famous and accomplished Halo competitors of all time.
In Halo 1 1v1s, Zyos would always use noise-canceling headphones because when people spawn, he could hear them spawn and click, right? That was a key piece to the whole puzzle, but you couldn't do that on four-man split screens because no one else would be able to hear anything, right? And we didn't have splitters back then. That was kind of the beginnings of like, oh, you can use headphones to an advantage. In 2005, SDK became Team 3D. Team 3D was sponsored by Sennheiser's, but they didn't have a mic. You know, it was really just open ear, but it helped them like, you know, hear information a little bit better. For us, that was a non-starter, even though we had tried it out a couple of times, because our communication was never that good.
Now, Carbon found themselves constantly running into the brick wall that was Team 3D, who later became the legendary final boss, with their communication difficulties continuing to hold them back.
Easy, Got him. Hey. Come on, Eric, put pressure on Clark. Clark 2. Okay, the flag is Clark 2.
Lane inside the baseline.
Come on, guys. You can't let this happen.
Now, while Carbon was struggling with Final Boss, another team on the circuit, Straight Rippin', showed up to the Orlando event in 2006 with a sci-fi headset splitter from a small startup company that would radically change their team's communication.
We prototyped it with Peter and Fonzie were just super helpful in like defining what they needed. And they had a MLG event in Orlando in 2006. And we're like, we're coming there with this prototype called the Mux Box. And we took 5 awesome Vader Dynamic headsets and modded them and put these steel faceplates on them and put all their gamer tags on the side. So we created that idea of the gamer tags and showed up.
Despite showing that they could consistently topple Final Boss at the end of 2006, by the start of 07, Carbon were right back to being the bridesmaids. And so I thought, all right, maybe we should really just give this whole sci-fi splitter thing a shake. But before we get to that, we should really just take a step back for a second and ask the question explicitly, how did this splitter thing come to be? And like, what exactly did it do? Why was it so revolutionary? To answer that question, I am of my own volition allowing Colten to cut away from me and to talk to all of you. Again, this is happening because I am allowing it. All right, and not because he's the editor and he just gets to arbitrarily.
And now, the guy who actually knows what he's talking about.
While some of you probably remember that era of console gaming on your CRT television in the living room with a one-eared headset on, what was going on at MLG events was an entirely different beast. So let me walk you through what this artifact of gaming history actually did and what made it so revolutionary for players on the MLG Pro circuit. And I'll let Jordan Reese, one of the co-founders of Astro Gaming, explain the origins of their idea.
I went to a house party. I went down in the basement and I was like, what's going on here? There was a guy and a girl sitting in front of a HD TV, if that's what it was at the time, with a wall of sound, like just like $10,000, $15,000 of audio equipment, and they're playing a video game. And he's got a headset on, and he's got an Xbox communicator around his head. And I started talking to him. I'm like, why are you doing that? He's like, well, I got to talk to people here, and I got to listen. I'm like, oh, I need to talk to this guy more. I need to understand what's going on here. He was explaining the problem of game audio and voice chat being separate channels. Like, you could solve that. So I had my first focus group. In that group was Peter, also known as Fallacy, and Alphonse, Fonzie, Brett, Nated, and they described essentially the Halo LAN setup. Again, these are Xbox originals, right? So it was like, there was no quality voice communication solution, and they're just saying this is it's a impediment to when we're landing. Like we're screaming, trying to call out strats. We have a coach. It's chaotic, and I was like, oh yeah, we could certainly solve that.
So let's talk about how a typical MLG stage was set up during this era. Each player had their own CRT television and Xbox for a total of 8 of each on stage. The crowd was packed into raised bleachers surrounding the stage, making it a pretty loud environment to try and communicate in, especially considering most teams didn't even use headphones. Enter Astro Gaming's prototype, the so-called Mux Box. This futuristic mixer had individual inputs for 4 TVs, mic and headphone jacks for 5 headsets, so your coach could talk too, then a volume knob as well as a knob to balance the amount of game audio and comms audio you were hearing. Now, instead of getting a cacophony of crowd noise, people yelling callouts, and 4 TVs worth of game audio, each player was in their own world of audio, only hearing exactly what they needed, their teammates, and their own gameplay. Someone who got to experience this turning point firsthand was actually Walter Duccini, who would later go on to become one of Astro Gaming's first employees, but at the time was competing in Battlefield.
We were all, again, competing at PAX, and we ended up being the first team outside of MLG to use these products in a way that were competitive, even before like the retail stuff actually launched. We had the advantage of being able to talk quietly and not yell down the row.
Hopefully that gives you a better understanding of just how revolutionary this prototype was in the console space. Now, I could sit here and gush about the A40s all day, but Dimitri hasn't really gotten to that part of the story yet, so I'll let him get back to the Halo nostalgia trip.
And that was the guy who actually knows what he's talking about.
Okay, so now that we understand all of that, back to Carbon.
First 2 events, I think we go second and second. And then we have a LAN, and this is before Dallas, so we have our own LAN. Triple X had reached out to Astro Gaming to be like, hey, can we get a prototype of whatever device it is that you're using? Because we're struggling with communication at these events. Like, the fans are generally speaking 90% in favor of Final Boss, and we have 10%, and it's really hard for us to drown out some of the noise to hear our communication and comms. And they were like, yeah, absolutely. And so we went into the LAN with it, and then during that event, it made life a lot easier for us because we knew everything. And then it was just really just like tweaking it. And we had this one moment where Triple X had put like the equivalent, like a CD player, like an old school boombox next to us, and blasted noise in there to see if like we could hear anything as we were playing 2v2s, and we couldn't hear anything. And we were like, this is like such an advantage because we can drown out everything, absolutely everything.
Thanks to Astro, Carbon went into MLG Dallas having revolutionized their comms.
And a bigger shout out to Carbon taking the third event of our season. Everyone was counting Carbon out. They're going to get third. They're going to lose agency. They came in here and smacked Final Boss around.
In large part because of Astro's prototype, Carbon were playing with the kind of coordination that was uncharacteristic for these young guns. It was like they were playing chess while everybody else was playing checkers. And let's just say it didn't go unnoticed.
Sometime in the middle of that 07 season, that's when we were told we couldn't participate anymore. I don't know who it was, but it was another team complained. And I was just like, that's not fair. We got banned. But it also let me stop being an audio pit crew for these guys and running around every 6 weeks. It's just like, it's hard. Like, we had to get a shippable product.
Astro Gaming took this big brick that we kept giving a lot of feedback on. It's like, this is so big to lug around. Like, Triple X had like a giant backpack. He looked like he was like the comms specialist from the Navy SEALs team when he was walking around with this thing. And so they took that big box and they turned it into a small mix amp that you could kind of dangle them each in together.
Because MLG banned a fucking metal briefcase, okay? The A40 headset and mix amp were born.
Mike and Sundance were like, hey, you screwed this all up. Like, it was like, hey, as soon as you have a product we can all use, we scrambled and came up with a product for the start of the 08 season. I think to deal with MLG, to have MLG branding on it, and we were selling them at the event, and they had a revenue share. And that's how we kind of got our feet, in the door and at the feet of all the gamers at Major League Gaming.
By the start of the 2008 MLG circuit, the A40 mix amp combo had become the standard tech of virtually every serious roster in competitive Halo, and an at-home necessity for anyone looking to take their game to the next level.
The very first event in 2008, everybody had Astros. Every single player had Astros. That was a top team inside of there.
We had headsets at every single one of these stations. So it was sitting on the chair when people came in to sit down, and they could just pop it on and use it. It was there. And that's why I think everybody had that sudden realization so quickly of what was the usefulness of this product. But it really became the standard equipment almost instantaneously.
Over the next few years, Astro not only refined their headset and mix amp and released entirely new models, but cemented themselves as both an icon and institution of console esports.
Astros at that point, we were like, oh, these are primarily only used in Halo. But because Astro Gaming was sponsoring Major League Gaming, it actually applied to every other console circuit that they ran. Gears of War players all grabbed them. Like, after 2008, it was just like you only ever saw Astro Gaming book bags, Astro Gaming headsets, and everybody only used Astro Gaming headsets on the circuit.
The way the original A40 was built, that had the open ear headsets with the speaker tag. So that was done very intentionally because a lot of those pros on the main stage were used to looking and yelling at each other. And not everybody wanted to wear a headset, but you still needed to be able to hear what was happening around you. And part of that competitive advantage is you could hear through the headset quietly the things that your teammates were saying, but you could also hear the other team yelling.
In fact, it wasn't really until console esports as a whole began to taper off in the early to mid 2010s that Astro's reign started coming to an end. Astro sold to Skullcandy in 2011 and again to Logitech in 2017, while MLG signed a massive deal with Turtle Beach in 2012. Despite releasing newer, shinier models and even venturing into PC esports, the consensus is that Astro have never quite been the fixture that they once were. Still, for those who came up on them, Astros were are a way of life.
If you were in the circuit from like 2007 to 2012, like you're wearing Astro Gaming headsets probably for the rest of your life because they had fantastic quality, they were reliable, they were very easy to work with, customer support was fantastic, and they cared a lot about the player's experience.
But the technical nuts and bolts, I mean, that was a lot of Josh and Jordan identifying a need and having conversations with a number of pro players and teams saying like, hey, what's missing from your experience? So it was very, very purpose-built, and it gave people that advantage and just the technical solutions that we brought that was all based off of largely player feedback.
Now, I may not have been a pro player, but Astro was such a foundational part of my introduction to competitive gaming and the culture around it that I still have and use my original A40s from more than 15 years ago.
There's also 100% a joke you made about them leaving quite the impression.
Not that bad.
Bro, I have a dent in my...
Anyway, memes aside, Astros continue to stand as a relic of not only a bygone age, but a golden one. A time when esports was raw and organic and uncharted and just this crazy, rambunctious thing that wasn't so much in need of refinement as it was, well, balancing. And for an entire generation of console gamers, the Astros did just that. They turned a screaming, raging shit show into an honest-to-God esport. Not a lot of peripheral manufacturers can say that. So if you didn't know about Astro before, you do now and can put some respect on the name.
Oh my God, it's worse now.
I'm not even moving, man. Literally, like, I don't understand. $1 million studio, buddy. Yeah.